My name is Kenneth Lobenberg. I have been working in Photoshop now for about 20 years. Believe it or not, I started at a very young age. I feel like I'm confessing here. It's like it was hard at first, and I moved on to harder things like Illustrator and InDesign. But uh, I graduated from Savannah College of Art and Design with a double bachelor in illustration and graphic design. And I've worked in the pre-press industry for about 7 years, and I've worked in the wall decor industry for about 6 now. So basically, wall decor is designing the art that goes on walls, murals, wallpapers, things like that. I consider myself more of a graphic artist than a graphic designer. I can't do graphic design. I'm just more of an artist. But Photoshop is probably my first love. So, I also run a Facebook group myself called Photoshop is Fun. Once a week, I post a tutorial, usually between 3 to 10 minutes, on different topics. We just recently did one on how to make snow and make things look like it's snowing, which is a lot of fun. I'm going to be using that image here today as well. If you have any questions, come and ask me afterward. I'm always open for more questions, especially if it's a question you're afraid. You're like, oh, it's really simple, and I don't want to seem like I don't know what I'm doing. You can come ask me afterward. That's fine. I'm not going to be offended. And there's no such thing as a dumb question. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing we're going to be going over today is layers. After that, we're going to go more into like blend modes and what they are and how they work. And after that, we're going to go into smart objects. I know these things don't seem like they all are cohesive, but they really all based around layers. And then kind of throughout the entirety, we're going to be doing layer masks because you kind of will use layer masks for all of these. So it's kind of more of like a comprehensive look at what layers are. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so for the absolute novice out here, this panel right here on my right side is your layers panel. The way layers work is they're like a flat, clear piece of glass. So think of them just completely empty. If I create a new layer down here, you're going to see that this layer is completely empty. There's nothing here. Now, the reason you get this checkerboard pattern is not because somebody's accidentally spilled something horrible into your computer or into your document. That's the way Photoshop displays empty layers. Just nothing. It doesn't know what to put there, so it just puts a generic checkerboard. Once you start filling these layers, that'll be the only thing that shows up on it. So that's currently all that we have on that layer. So if I command click on that layer, it's going to marquee that image. Probably hard to see here, but you can see little dancing ants around it, which you can barely see on this, but trust me, they're there. So layers can be stacked. You can do lots of different things to them. Right up here we have what's called opacity, and if I turn on this bottom layer here and I change this opacity, you're going to see that this begins to become more transparent. So you can make it less or more transparent. I want you to keep that in mind for when we go to blend modes, because you're going to ask yourself, wait a minute, how is this different than a blend mode? And I will explain that, so just keep thinking about it. All right, if I'm talking too fast, let me know. I have a tendency to do that, especially when I'm nervous, but I'm not nervous here. Just let me know if I start talking too fast. All right, so we can lock layers and all sorts of fun things here, but you're probably not going to use most of these. I use them maybe once a year max. The tools that I do use are mainly here at the bottom. So you've got your trash can, which is pretty self-evident. It destroys layers. If you don't want to destroy a layer, but you want to get rid of it, just poke it in the eye. When you poke it in the eye, it goes away. Like most people, if you poke them in the eye, they probably leave. You can unpoke them in the eye and they come back, and they do fun things. Next to that, you have what's called a new layer button. So it just creates another empty layer. Now I can create a million of these, and there's not going to be anything in them. They're just literally new empty layers. So I'm going to undo those. Next to that, you have group layers. Now that's where, say, maybe you're working on a certain part of a project, like maybe you're photoshopping somebody's eyes, and you're like, great, I got that part done, but it's a really small piece of that, a puzzle. Like, for instance, if maybe I was tracing out one of these guys on my desk and I was changing one of the colors, and you want to just keep all those layers isolated in one area, what you would do is you would go ahead and just select these layers, hit Shift, hit the group button, and that's going to create a group of layers. Now you can turn those layers on and off in one stroke, which is great if you want to see, maybe get lots of little parts of how you're changing. I don't know, maybe this guy's hair, you're going to make it yellow, and his cheeks you're going to make blue, and his shirt you're going to make purple or whatever. but you want to do this all in separate layers, you can keep them all together so you can keep him in one spot. We're going to come back to groups because of blend modes in a little bit, but just keep them in mind as well. All right. So right here we have, I always forget what these things are called, but I use them all the time. Come on, let me go. Adjustment layers. Now these will probably look familiar if you've used Photoshop before. A lot of these are come up under here under the image adjustments area, and that's exactly what they are. It's the exact same filters or menu items you have up there, but they're what do you call it? Mask based. So if I'm going for black and white here, and I put that there, it'll allow me to go ahead and adjust this just like normal for a black and white. But you can see here I've actually got a layer that goes with, or a layer mask that comes with it. And I can actually paint in that layer mask with black and get rid of that, because as Cornelius always tells us, black conceals and white reveals. So you can see now that I've painted my shape in there, that gray doesn't show up anymore. I'm not going to go too much into these because you can do an entire hour class on just these, but I just want you to know that's where these things are.
Now, is that, you get the same exact result from going on the layer panel versus up on the layer menu?
You do, but the only thing you don't get, though, is you would actually have to do it to the layer 1 itself. You couldn't just do it to essentially an empty layer like this, and that would create what's called a destructive photo layer, edit. So once I go ahead and make this black and white, and I go do the rest of my piece, and I come back in an hour, and I'm like, oh, I needed that brown color there. Well, you know what? You better have a saved file because it's gone. But with something like this, I can poke it in the eye as well, and it's gone. It's back. So this is kind of like a non-destructive photo edit. Especially if you're doing a really large project with lots of layers, you really want to do lots of non-destructive photo edits, because once you lose something, it's gone, and you don't want to lose hours upon hours work trying to put something back in that could have easily been done with a non-destructive way and saved you tons of time. And don't feel bad if you have done that. I've been working in Photoshop for 20 years. It's happened to me so many times, I cannot count. I could probably fill a dictionary with cuss words due to the fact that I've yelled at myself for doing that same thing. But there are, like I said, lots of these. Have fun and explore these. I always tell my students when they're learning Photoshop, the easiest way to learn Photoshop is to destroy a photo. So get a photo you think looks maybe slightly interesting and start using anything you can and see how bad you can make that photo and then make it worse. Because you're not worried at that point about making something look cool and stopping. You're like, oh, that does this and that does that, and in 6 months you're going to be working on a project and you're going to be like, you know what, I bet you that does that, and you're going to be able to use it. So, all right, so next to that you actually have the mask button. So let's say I come down here to my layer 1 and I hold down that mask. It's creating that same kind of layer mask we had up here. And it works just the same way. So if I come in here and I start painting with the black again, it disappears. Now, it doesn't create a hole in that image. If later I want to come back in and I can disable that mask, that artwork's back. So that's a non-destructive photo edit. We like layer masks versus erasing. Because, like again, if you really wanted that shape there now, and it's an hour and a half down the road, you really wanted that information back, it's gone. You'd have to go back and find your source file, put it back in, hope you didn't do anything weird to it, and see if you could redo it. With layer masks, you do have this panel up here that opens up when you double click it, which is the density, which is basically how gray you're going to make it. And you can also adjust that by using less of a black brush. Say you're using like a 50% gray brush, it'll be 50% visible.
So functionally that's kind of equivalent to opacity.
Yeah, essentially it's exactly the same as opacity. But you also have feathering, which is really cool, because if you really turn that feathering up, you can see that now it's kind of getting blurry. Let me turn that back up to 100% there. You can see it's getting soft edges. That's really useful when you're doing a color correction on somebody's face. And maybe you've isolated the shadow, like on my side of the face here, but you don't want those really hard lines now that you're doing that like light in that area. If you feather that layer mask, it'll kind of creep in and smooth a little so you don't get those hard, jagged lines in a photo edit. So. And then my favorite thing, effects. Now, effects are really old. They were really popular in the 90s. You used to see beveled buttons on every website possible. It was like, hey, we need a button there. Who knows bevel? Guess what? You're hired. And they used to do lots of those things. Now, don't get me wrong. I still use these. I love drop shadows from time to time. But just know when not to use them, is what I'm saying. You know, it's okay to use them, but just be careful. For those that don't know, I'm going to go ahead and make a nice beveled button here. All right, so let's get our tool out here. What color do you think we should fill this with? What's a pretty color? Blue? I was thinking something maybe a little more hideous. Let's go for that nice green. It's perfect for web in the 90s. Except for we wouldn't be able to display something that bright. We only had 256 colors. All right. So we had that nice button there, and we're going to put a bevel and emboss on it. And we're going to make that nice and big. Make that bevel sharp. Let's pull that sharpness down. So these, you know, you can make really, really gross, fake-looking Photoshop buttons with this stuff if you really need to. It's kind of fun to do sometimes. Like for my 20th anniversary of Photoshop, I wanted to make a really like gross 90s, like badly filtered Photoshop, like 20 years, yeah, shirt, but I never got around to it. But you know, you guys can explore more of these. This is more of like an overview. Say you want to go ahead and put a drop shadow on it too. You can actually do that from here as well without actually leaving. You used to be able to. Where'd the drop shadow go? Huh. Okay, let's hit OK. They just updated Photoshop, so some things have changed. But you can actually add more than one, so there we go. You can drag that drop shadow out and make it nice and fuzzy. Yeah, this is something I learned a few months ago. You can actually drag these around, which is kind of cool. And since I've got this use global lighting turned on, you can see that my button actually changes, so that way the light always looks like it's in the right spot. So sometimes I'll just drag it to where I need it, and then go ahead and do all my adjustments over here for, you know, hardness and things like that. So we've got a cool fake button now. Who wants it for the website? I'll put it up available online. I don't have my eye candy plugin installed. Do I? I might. I have my Alien Skins filters actually plugged in. I could do it if I wanted to. But I don't want to let you guys watch the render. All right, and then you have link. Now, linked files are one of these things that most people don't use, but are super cool. So let's say that we have our black snake here that we so lovely did, and we want our black snake and our horrible, horrible Photoshop button to always be friends and be in the same ratio to each other. So we move one, we move the other. So I'm going to select both of these, and I'm going to chain them together. And now I can't leave like a chain gang. They're stuck together. They're wherever one's going, the other one's going. So if I start moving these guys, they move together, which can be really cool, especially if you're using an image like this. And we talked about going ahead and maybe changing one of these toys, but you want to make sure that the shirt stays together. You can chain them together as well as putting them in the groups. That way you don't accidentally select them. Now, one thing that I absolutely love, which isn't technically layer related, but I find very useful, is this area right up here. Now this is auto select. So if you've got a lot of layers and you want to select just one layer in there, instead of trying to go through this and being like, okay, where's that one layer I wanted? You can actually just select that layer. And you can see here it's going to select that part that I'm clicking on. This can also be infuriating if you forget it's on. And you go to like, I found my layer, and you click on it and you get like 10,000 layers and you're like, oh, now I'm at the top again. Crud, where is my layer again? So make sure you know it's on or off. You can also select it for groups too. So you can move that entire group at one instead of just one layer in that group. All right. And then of course you've got your layers palette up here, which has got a lot of stuff. The one that I like the most is delete hidden layers, because that will, once you finish a document and you're like, I like this, I will usually delete hidden layers to go ahead and clear out all the junk that I was pretending to play with and I was kind of using that I didn't end up using. And that will reduce your file size and saving. So especially if you have a limited amount of storage space, it's a really nice way of doing stuff like that. And always keep your layered files unless you're absolutely positive you don't need them. Nothing's more infuriating than that. To be honest, I have 4 terabytes at my desk full of layered files. I think I recently created a 21 gigabyte Photoshop file. So my IT guys hate me. So. All right. Anybody have any questions about layers before I move on to blend modes? Okay. If you have something strikes you later, let me know. I can always go back. I know I just went over a lot of material really, really quick right there. So let us go back to our history. All right, so this is what you have when you have your blend modes. Now, who here's usually used a blend mode? All right, who here likes to use blend modes? Okay, so we got a couple people. Most of the time, blend modes, people are like, ugh, I don't know what they do. It's confusing. These names make no sense. I don't understand why, what does what. So I'm going to kind of break this down to you, and I'm going to put this link on the Facebook page where we leave today as well. Let's see, come on, Photoshop. All right, so blend modes break down into 7 different categories. And you see here, this is the same way we had up here, but this one is from a slightly older version of Photoshop. I think it's CS5, but it's still the same. So you have your normal blend mode. So you've got normal and dissolve. Dissolve is hideous. We won't go over that. It's almost never useful. I've only found one use for it in 20 years. Darken is one of my favorites. Now, these will basically all darken those layers. Some of them based on what's below that layer, and some of it just because it'll just darken anything.
Okay, so how does that compare to the brightness contrast? I know they're filters.
I will go over that in just a minute. I just want to kind of go over the basics of what each section does, and then we're going to talk about a couple of these. Unfortunately, there's 27 blend modes here, and I'm sure you guys have weekend plans, and I'm not going to go over all 27 of them because I respect your people. So converse to Lighten, we have, or Darken, we have Lighten. Now, a lot of these are actually like the opposite of each other, and that will explain more of how that works and why in just a minute. Contrast, which if you're a photographer, you're doing a lot of photography, you probably used a lot of. Immersion, cancellation, and composition components. These you don't use as much. Maybe component for color, hue, and saturation, but really not as much as some of the others. So let's go over some of these now. Let's see. All right, so right here we have the toolbar. Now, this is one of the things I love to do with these kind of things is make stuff look old. So I have an old paper texture in here, and I've also got the same texture in what I call black and white. So let's look at this black and white. Now you say, well, if you want it to be kind of superimposed on that menu, why don't we just use opacity? So if I turn the opacity down this, you're going to see that the problem is either A, we're getting too much foreground or that paper layer, and not enough menu for the background. Or we're getting way too much menu for the background and not enough paper layer. So it doesn't really look old, it just maybe looks a little dirty. And sometimes you may want that look, and that's completely cool. I'm not going to judge anybody. There's a million ways to skin a cat in Photoshop. But if you come up to something like multiply, what you're doing here is you're literally dropping out the lighter areas of an image. So you see right here we have these darker areas actually staying where they are. And what it does is this doesn't really matter what's below it. It's just going to drop out those lighter tones. So keep that in mind. Some of these other ones that we're going to use, like Darken, actually do care what's below them. And I'll go over that in just a minute. Now, this does not affect color. So if I come up here to this layer, which is the same exact texture, and I put it on multiply as well, you're going to see now we have like an actual vintage kind of almost sepia look. Because it's still dropping out those light tones, but there's still yellows and things like that that it's keeping, and it's basically making them transparent because of that. And just like before, you can still do opacity. So you can still go like, I really like that, but it's still too intense, and kind of scale it back down. Sometimes you want to do that, especially on the ones for contrast later on. So, all right, let's turn that off and go back up here. So converse to multiply, we have Darken. Now, what Darken does is something really similar to that. It drops out the light tones, which I'm sounding like a broken record here, but it actually cares what's below it. So it's actually calculating this based on what's below it. Because what these blend modes really are algorithms. And I have an example here of algorithms because everybody who is an artist just absolutely loves doing equations like, in a beautiful mind. So here are some of the equations for multiply and some of the other ones. I'll be honest, I didn't really read through these. I'm not a math guy. I just kind of keep playing with stuff till it works. I'm sure somebody around here is probably much better at why this works than I am, but I'm not an engineer. So yeah, multiply is A times B. Okay, I get that, but I don't understand what that means in respects to multiply. I know it drops out the lights. So, like I said, this is all on that same page. I will be putting this link up in the description on the Facebook page. So, let's go ahead. Now that we have darken on this layer up here, this copy layer 1 of the light texture, I'm going to start darkening this copy layer here. And let's go ahead and start darkening that. So as you see, I start darkening that, less and less of that texture shows up. So if I lighten this really up, you see it's all texture. So it's actually calculating how much of it's going to knock out based on the color below it. So, if I pull this all the way down there, you're really only getting those darks because the comparison between the two is just not there. Is that clear? Or? I'm hoping so. By the way, if you're wondering how I brought up the light and brightness contrast without going into the menu, I really suggest everybody set key commands. I know I say this every time I do a presentation. If you use something more than once a day, set a key command for it. You're going to save yourself hours over a year. And that may not seem like much until you have to work several extra hours on a Friday. So, now that also works with colored layers too. So if I take this multiply and I put it in darken, we get a little bit different effect. And if I darken this again, you're going to see, it affects the colors, but it affects it differently than it did with the black and white. So, all right. Now, some of these ones up here, these are all darkened. Now, the ones we're going to jump to are lighten. Now, what's cool about these is that some of these are actually exact opposites. So they're like twins, evil twins to each other. So darken cares about what's underneath it. I guess it's a sensitive layer mask, or a sensitive blend mode. Lighten is also a sensitive blend mode, but it's sensitive in the other way. So it actually leaves the lights and knocks out the darks. And same with screen. Screen doesn't care. It doesn't give a, well, it doesn't care at all. And it goes ahead and it knocks out the darks or lights regardless of what's below it. So you can see like that's how these kind of, in some ways are related. Let's go ahead and see that in practice. So we are up here on darken, and let's go to, let's go to screen. Okay, so we have this still at 100%. You can see now we have no darks left. And again, just like with lighten, if I have this on screen and I start darkening this, you're going to see more and more stuff start to show up. More and more those dark areas until almost all of it shows up when I made that background layer almost black. But if I go ahead and switch over to screen, it doesn't care. I can darken this a lot, but it's just going to make those dark areas show through. It doesn't really care at all. And as you can see by the guy here, I should probably point on the screen so people on the internet can see. Right there you can see how dark it is. It just doesn't care. All right. Now we're going to go to the ones that I actually had to read the most about. And okay. All right, so now we're going to go to the contrast ones. Now, contrast, these guys right here, they actually work on both lights and darks, and some of them even midtones. And that's why for photographers, these are the ones you're probably going to use the most. And a lot of these are very similar, but different in subtle ways that make them much nicer. I'm only going to go over two of them because there's a lot of math involved in these, and I had to read a lot. And I only ever use these two for the most part. So we have overlay. Let's get back up here and turn this from lighten to overlay. And that's a horrible example of that. Let's turn this one to overlay. There we go. So that's even worse. We'll stick with that one. All right, so what overlay does is it uses the screen blend mode on lighter areas and the multiply blend mode on darker areas, and then knocks the 50% out altogether. So it's a really harsh transition. And you can see sometimes it's useful. Most of the time I only use it in very certain instances, and I can never seem to remember when those instances are. But as you can see, it's not super useful. It's like I said, it's very harsh. But its companion, soft light, does. It's much better. Goes ahead and it plays a little bit more with those midtones, and it reduces the screen and the multiply by 50%. So it's going to give you more of an organic or more of a natural kind of scaling to those kind of effects. So if I turn multi these on, all right. So that's basically kind of a basics of blend modes. Now I'm going to show you some examples of this. So here's a nice piece of old paper. It's one of my favorite pieces of old paper, which most people don't say, but I've got a massive texture library, about 25 gigs, and I use this one a lot. That's why it's my favorite. All right. Okay, so obviously we know we cannot see my lovely desk tchotchkes right now. Now, I would probably go ahead and put this on multiply. You're going to get that cool vintagey look. Maybe if you want, you might even come up here to adjustments, color balance, and maybe, well, not color balance, but adjustments, image adjustments, brightness. Pull out some of that darkness right there, or that color. You might even come up here to fading that a little to give it just a little bit of tint of color. And you might be like, wow, that's really nice. But there's other things you can do with this. One of the cool things I actually learned while doing this is, say you don't know what blend mode you want to use. Like you got home and you're like, wow, that was great, but that guy just ran through that stuff, and I can't remember which one was which. You can hold down the Shift key, and then using the plus and minus, you can actually just cycle through them. Now this is probably the best way to use these, because you don't really know how that effect is going to affect the layers below it. And this can just let you cycle through them pretty quick until you're like, no, 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 no. Well, that's interesting. But no. Well, that's a little bit softer. I kind of like that. Maybe if I turn down the opacity on that. No, no, that did not work. And then you can really just kind of go through them. Oops. So that's fun. Pardon? Oh. These are blend modes, yeah. So these are the same blend modes we've just been talking about that I went over like 5 of the 27. If you really want to explore all 27 without really having to read a lot, that's a great way of doing it. Honestly, I've learned a lot about blend modes doing research for this, but most of the time I just kind of scrolled through and hunt and pecked until I found one that I thought looked appropriate. And you start to learn these more and more intuitively as you use them. So don't... Shift, plus and minus. So you hit plus to go forward and minus to go back. So say you're like, no, I kind of like that one. Not like the one before it. I'm going to go back. You can go ahead and do that. So one thing, though, you can actually do several different types. And now we've got 2 of them on here. Let's find something goofy and weird looking. That looks great, like a horrible photo. If you go ahead and select these, and you hit Command-G, or you go down here to Group, you're going to see that your blend mode changes to Pass-Through. Now what that basically means is that that group doesn't have a set blend mode. It's like whatever's in that container is in that container. I don't care. I'm letting everything fly. But if you select this and you go on to Multiply, it's going to change both of the ones inside to multiply, to display as Multiply. Even though this one says Vivid Light, it's kind of taking what those things are doing and just saying, I'm multiplying both of them. So, and I believe you can actually use the key commands on this one too if you really want. Yeah. So you're still getting some really weird stuff there. All right. Okay, one more example I wanted to show you. So recently I got a commission from a piece at work for what I was described as a hipster office. We want to show movement. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? They're like, we wanted to have some organics and some graphics and, something cool. And I'm like, yeah, those aren't really words, but that's okay. I'll create something. So we started talking, and they're like, oh, I want the Aurora Borealis. And I'm like, okay, well, how am I going to do that? So I found this piece of art we had in our archives. And I'm like, that kind of looks like an Aurora Borealis, or the Northern Lights. And so I went back to this piece, and I did some filtering on it to make it look like it was moving, or not moving, yeah, moving. And then I did this with it. So I went ahead and adjusted some of those colors. But you can see here I'm actually on Lighten because what that's doing is it's knocking out all the darker areas of this piece and allowing the stars to show through. So if I come back up here and put it on normal and turn the opacity up to 100%, you're going to see like these are really dark areas. And you know, like all those really dark areas where if you think about the way the northern lights work, the darker areas are just where the sky is. You wouldn't want color really in that. You want maybe a hint of color, but not full color. And that's why, you know, when I turn this on, you can see that it's kind of got that effect to it. So, you know, like I said, just play with these. You can use these in core, you know, with other stuff. Don't think just because you put a blend mode on that layer, well, I can't put a filter on it. Definitely put a filter on it. You know, if that's what you think you need to do, put something else on it. Doesn't matter. Erase the you-know-what out of it. It's fine. So you can also put a layer mask on these areas and start painting certain things out. Like maybe you wanted this to look that bad because you want, we'll say, Captain Phasma from the new Star Wars movie to really shine. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to paint her out so that way she really shows up. Or maybe you want this guy from Fallout 4, since he's the guy from the intelligence bobblehead, to really shine. And you want to do a really bad job at masking stuff out, so that's why you're doing it with your tool that's right here on your laptop instead of getting your Wacom tablet out. You can do that, and that's going to go ahead and get rid of all those masks and those layer blend modes in those areas. Or say if you want, you can just do it only on one of those inside there. So I can actually just come in and make him vintagey, but not whatever you want to call that effect. So, all right. Any questions about blend modes? I know I went over a lot right there, and I didn't go over everything because there's so much to go over. Lovely. Okay. Really, I don't mind questions. I'm not going to bite. I'm usually pretty polite.
So, are you still going to be talking about, let's say, that versus the light above the adjustment layer?
Well, maybe I misunderstood your question to begin with.
Just the, like say, the difference between the darken blend mode versus the brightness contrast.
Okay. So the way that the darken blend mode works versus the darken adjustment layer is the darken adjustment layer will work on everything that you don't mask out. So it's going to go ahead and darken those lights, it's going to darken those darks, it's going to darken everything. But the darken filters will only work as like an overlay. And if you go back to what we had over here in this menu, and I turn on, let's say, multiply, you're going to see that it's not actually affecting the lighter areas. It's leaving those things, especially if I'm using something like darken, which is then really dependent on how light the stuff is below it. It's trying to let that lighter stuff below shine through. So it's only trying to put those crunchy textures into the darker areas, or the absolute darkest part of that texture into all the lighter areas. I mean, we can go ahead and put a darkness mode on here. So we can set this to like maybe normal, I guess, and set the opacity to like 50%. And then come up here and do a brightness contrast. This is the one you were talking about, right? Okay. And we can darken that, but you can see it's not quite the same. I mean, you're getting a really cool effect, don't get me wrong, and maybe this is the effect you're looking for. Maybe you really want, you know, this to look like spilled coffee or something like that on your laptop, so you're going to come up here to this, maybe turn this one on to 50% opacity, put it on normal, and you can see we can keep that same one there, but, you know, it doesn't quite have that same composite effect. It almost looks like it's layered instead of being a natural image. Did I answer the question this time? Okay, cool. Sorry about that. Oh, just to let you know, these, what do you call it, adjustment layers do affect everything below them, regardless of what it is, unless you mask it out. So, or clipping mask. Yeah, that's why I remember masking it out, yeah. Tomato, tomato. So. All right. So, who here wants to learn about smart objects? I love smart objects. One thing to note, if you're embedding smart objects into your projects, prepare for a large file size. They are massive. This piece of R2-D2 in the snow that I have here is not really that large. It's 16 by, roughly 16.5 by almost 11 at 300 dpi. It's a 5.5 gig file. And as you can see, there are not that many layers in here. There's probably less than 25 layers. So have a powerful computer, have lots of storage space, and be prepared to make some coffee and get up and walk around, check Facebook on your phone, stuff like that. So we're not going to start out here with R2 though. We're going to start out here with something a little more simple. Now this is a piece of art that I am working on, mainly as a demo piece. Now what's really cool about this is you can see we've got these links here. Now you're going to get a couple different types of smart object links. Some of them are going to look like links like this. Some of them are going to look like little image icons, and some of them are going to look like clouds. It didn't always used to be like that. I remember them always looking very similar until recently, so I think it might have been a recent update for Photoshop. But the cool thing is, when I double click on this, it's going to open up the original image. So now if I want to come in here, and maybe I want to adjust the saturation on this thing, and make it an alien San Francisco, after the pod people have come, I've gone ahead and done that adjustment. I can hit save, and it's going to go ahead and update in my bridge piece. Now that's really cool, especially if you're trying to go ahead and do something that's independent of something else. So the reason I say this is, like, I have these right here. Does anybody here ever do business cards for people? And you want to show them what it would look like already done, but you don't want to do as much work as I'm getting ready to show you every time you do it? All right, so let's go ahead and let's place a linked file. Now that's what that's going to do, is that's going to embed another Photoshop file as a smart object into this file. And I'm going to use my business card that I never went ahead and got done because I looked at it for a month and decided I just didn't like it. Or maybe I looked at it for a month and then forgot about it, and then somebody asked me for a business card and I was like, oops. So let's go ahead and mask this in here. Now, granted, I did not shoot this image. These original designs here are not mine. The ones I'm placing in them are. So I'm not trying to steal anybody's work. I just want to let you guys know that ahead of time. So let's go ahead and match those corners. After you get it close to this, I like to zoom in and make sure it looks really clean. Now, you're going to be using this over and over again, so I really would suggest making sure it looks as clean as possible. Don't just think, well, this is just Jeff, and I don't care about Jeff, and he buys from me regardless of how bad this looks. Nobody here's the name Jeff, right? If you are, that's what I thought. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean you personally. I'm just using a name out of the blue. So, so anyway, well, there's no Tom's here. There's no Tom's here, right? Okay, so we'll say it was Tom's then, and you don't care if Tom likes it or not. But that looks good there. Let's go ahead and do it again and port the other one. And let's go do the back, because we want to show off the back of the card too. Boy, I've been doing these short 5-minute presentations for so long now, over the last 3 months. It's really weird to be doing one this long now. And it's also weird not to be able to, like, stop, pause, and then edit out that part. Oh, if you grab the wrong angle and you start doing this like this and it disappears, don't fret. Your artwork hasn't disappeared. You've just kind of inverted your image onto itself. See this little point right there in the center? You pull that back out and it'll be fine. I freaked out last night when I was doing this demo for myself and that happened. Where did my artwork go? Okay. The tediousness of fun. I was working on a piece recently that was about 15 gigabytes, and I had to do a size correction on it, which they wanted to keep the layers in case they wanted to move something, and it took me 4 hours. And I felt like I was just watching my life drain across with that little toolbar just slowly filling up. There's only so many jumping jacks and calisthenics you can do in your office before you get too sweaty. Alright, so we have these here, but they don't really look like they're there maybe, and you want to go ahead and put some effects on them. So let's put a new layer and select these, and I'm just going to make these look really bad. for just effect. I do know what I'm doing sometimes. So I'm going to put a shadow on them. Oh, that's a perfect shadow. That looks so realistic. And maybe you're going to put some other textures on top and stuff like that. And then you're like, great, I've got this done. I'm going to email this out to my client. And then your next client comes along and he's like, oh, okay, well, I want to see what mine will look like printed on the table. All you have to do is double click on it. It's going to open up that original file. And I've already placed this in here, but I'm going to turn this on. Hit save. I'm going to go back to my card design, and it's going to update that into there. So I don't have to go through that tedious process of doing all those little movements to get its position just right. I just have to go through and update that. Sure, I can go over again with the card down here. So I select the card, new card front, as it says right there. Double click on the chain, and it's going to open up that original Photoshop file. And then any edits I do to this Photoshop file, like say if I go ahead and open up the front of this client's card, so the front. And I'm going to copy that in. Please don't design your cards in Photoshop. Use something like InDesign. This is really good for mock-ups, but I wouldn't usually suggest doing that unless it's very graphically heavy for stuff like I did with watercolor. It's usually just a bad idea to do that. Well, because when you're creating files with text in them, the way that it embeds the fonts into those PDFs allows the RIP to read them more cleanly, and then goes ahead and gets you a sharper print. And it's all from InDesign. In Photoshop, it's just looking at it more as pixels, and so it can't always interpret it real well. Not to mention you have to do usually it twice. I usually do mine at 600 dpi to get clear text in Photoshop. And that's if you got good contrast, you can do that. But even then, you're running the problem of that RIP deciding it doesn't like a 600 dpi file, and the RIP saying, I'm only doing 300 because that's all I'm designed to process. And then your text can come out looking blurry. A RIP is a rasterized image processor. So let's say you design something gorgeously beautiful and you send it in a weird file format. The RIP may not be able to read that. And what the RIP does is it converts that file over to a type of file that the machine who's printing it is. So say you're in the 90s, it's ripping it to plates that will be burned into, I don't remember the burned plates. It uses plastic back when I did it, and it would basically burn those into plastic, and then somebody put those on a press, and then they'd roll them. Nowadays we use digital copiers, really. They're just giant copiers, but we call them digital presses. But they're really just copiers. And it'll convert it to those same kind of things for that. A lot of these RIPs also have fonts installed, so it will read that font, and it can actually reproduce it really cleanly inside your document if it can actually read the font. But unfortunately, Photoshop doesn't save that font information. So it also is then just trying to be like, I think it looks like Bedoni, but I don't know, so I'm just going to leave it what it is. Just as like a little FYI. So anyway, but for something like a mock-up like this that we're not sending to print, which will probably mostly be done through either web or email, it doesn't matter how uber clear it is. I mean, if they're angry they can't print their business cards off the mock-up you're sending them to see if they like it, they're probably not a good client and they're probably trying to rip you off. So I'm going to go ahead and paste it on there. I'm just going to save this again. Now what that's going to do is that's going to save this onto that Photoshop document that I already created. So if we go over here to my demo folder, you can see that I've got right here, new front and new card back. And those are the files that I'd already had saved. And you can see now if I hit preview, they no longer look like my cards because I've saved that over that. But now that I've done that, it's going to update over here in my card design sample. So now I've got all that work that I did to make sure that those angles were correct saved onto that already. And I can just hit, go up here to File, Export, Save for Web Legacy because I'm old, and go ahead and export that. So yeah, it's a really nifty little tool. Yeah, well, the thing is, after you set do the initial setup on this, it's really quick to do. It's going to give you that edge above your other freelance clients when you're like, here's what your cards look like in a real world environment. Yeah, they do. They open that up and they're like, right, and especially because you can go ahead and then maybe put it next to a blotter if you want on somebody's desk, and then go, so that's what size a business card is, because I have no idea. Yeah, so or if you're doing maybe book covers for people, that's a good way of doing it. I do a lot of art renders, and I've been looking at doing this by basically replacing the art inside of a frame on a wall already, so that way I can save a lot of time that way. See me after the class. I want to show you something really cool. I built a render engine library in Photoshop Actions. Do we actually have that? 'Cause we might have that the lesson I did on that from like last year up on the website maybe. It's a really intricate lesson. So we're going to go now over to R2D2. Now this is kind of combining everything we talked about today into one piece. So not only do we have stuff with soft light on it to go ahead and give it a little bit of color back into it, we have this set for screen to go ahead and give it that snow look. I think I actually used, yeah, here's another screen one that I did. And those are just normal with opacities right now, I guess. But it kind of just really going ahead and giving us that snow. Now, if you look down here, I have this little cloud icon layer. Now, this is like a toy that I bought my son, which is about 18 inches tall. But I kind of wanted to make it look good, so I shot it at that right angle. But the problem was that I got this toy from somebody I found online. I traded a poster for him for it. And it was missing some parts, and it was kind of scuffed up. So what I did is I went in, and I clone stamped out all those little funny spots. You can see here, and turn them on and off again. If I just turn those on, you can see the spots themselves if I invert them. All these little spots here. And then I photoshopped in a door, and I put some fake bevel on it. But I wasn't sure if I really wanted to flatten this, because maybe I decided that I didn't like the way the bevel looks when the snow's there, or maybe I wanted to put a lightsaber coming out of the hole because I'm going to stand behind my Jedi Knight robe and I didn't want him throwing me a lightsaber. I don't know. There's a million reasons I might want to leave that door there, and I don't know all of them, and that's the reason I'm going to leave it there. But I want to be able to do a layer effects on this. So part of doing the snow in this piece was I had to have a flattened layer because I needed to go ahead and do some filtering to it, and I couldn't do filtering to groups. But I didn't want to lose those layers. Now, I could have always gone ahead and taken this initial image and duplicated these layers by hitting Command J, and then flattening those into one layer with Command E, and then I still have those there, but I don't really have those there. I'm now just increasing my file size, which honestly adding a smart object really did not increase my file size, but I wanted to see if I could do it. And I'm sure this will be useful later, and the more I do it now, the more likely I am to remember it later when I need to use it. So I did that because I needed a flattened layer. And then I started applying all these other things. So, and that's where you got R2D2 in the snow, like that. Although I did another image version of this image of my backyard with that R2 in it, and it was just at a cold snap, and I posted it in Facebook, and I'm like, it's snowing in Austin! And then a lot of my friends were like sharing it, like, look, it's global warming, and I'm like, no, it's just Photoshop. It's just Photoshop. Just chill out, people, Yeah, so. And then there's the snow I also added as well. So, which is a custom brush I built. Let's go ahead and spill that black, and I can show you what that looks like. So there's all the snow, which looks like it took a long time, but it's about 6 layers, and it took like 20 minutes. So, I guess I did run a little fast. I'm on an hour, and I'm done. So, do you have any questions? Anything else you guys want to ask me about? I'm open for anything. Sure.
I only have Photoshop. I don't have access to InDesign or even Illustrator, and so when I make business cards, which I do occasionally, are there any tricks I can do to make it come out sharper?
maybe not necessarily sharper, but you are putting bleed on these. Okay, are you building the bleed into the cards? So if you look at what I did on this card here, you can see that I've got a couple sets of lines here. I've got the outside set and the inside set. That outside set here is actually just bleed area. And I went ahead and set that up. Normally, excuse me, normally I don't design cards in Photoshop, but I did it this time because I wanted these letters to look like they were watercolored. And there really isn't a good watercolor brush that's actually got transparencies, or not brush, but font that's got transparencies in it. And most of the ones that you find that do, the rips are going to go insane when you use them because it's not a standard font. It's breaking a little bit of rules to look nice, and transparencies and fonts really don't go along that well together in rips. So, did I answer the question? I hope. I mean, unfortunately, it's just
There just isn't anything you can do.
send it to them at 600 DPI and let them know that that's what it is. Sometimes it'll help. Save it as a PDF. It may still recognize the font information in there. So if I go ahead and hit Save As, and make sure your layers are still selected. Oh, and also make sure you're in CMYK as well when you're designing. Because if you're not in CMYK, you may be like, I love that bright green / red. And then you're like, why is it so dull? Because you guys realize that, imagine CMYK is it's a color space, right? Imagine it's actually the size like a baseball. RGB is like the size of a basketball. So if you're designing in that basketball size area, you're going to be really disappointed when everything is reduced down to that baseball. You know. But yeah, if you come over here to Save As, and you go over to PDF, and go ahead and hit Save, you're going to get a lot of dialogue options over here. And I believe one of them, go ahead and ask your print provider what the highest compatibility they have is. It's set to default to 5, but we're already now up to 9. If their RIP can handle a higher one, I'm not saying for sure it will, but there's probably more, Adobe's probably built in more stuff for designers like you that it may recognize those fonts. But always ask them, because I know my RIPs were notoriously old. Even if you bought a RIP brand new out of the box, the software was probably written 10 years ago, and then it was been updated for the last 10 years to keep patching it to fix stuff. And one of the things they almost never patch is the Adobe compatibility for Acrobat. I don't know why. I mean, you'd think that, you know, everything comes over as a PDF. You always want to send stuff over as a PDF, but why would we update that? It's not broken. Subsequently, if you're getting proofs back from printers where stuff is dropping out, and they're like, I don't know, just keep lowering your Adobe Acrobat save right here, and that's going to change your standard over here, and eventually it'll get smart enough or dumb enough to understand it. So, you had some more questions, Donna?
For smart objects, what are their limitations?
Um,
When would you not want to use a smart object?
you know, anything I'm going to go ahead and carve up. So, if you look at this bridge piece I did over here, you notice that I didn't actually cut these. I used layer masks to get rid of these areas here. So if I go ahead and delete this layer mask or disable it, you can see that it's actually that full piece. You can't literally just take this area here and then jump it up to a new layer. Or see, it doesn't actually cut it out. It's keeping everything there. Or it gets rid of the smart object part. So then it'll say if I went back to these here, I double click them and I'm like, invert, because I want it to be crazy, crazy aliens. Or whatever. And I go back to my bridge sample. You can see that one didn't get updated with the rest. So anytime you're going to be carving something out, you can use a layer mask. One of the cool things about this that I didn't bring up though, let's go ahead and open up a file here. We'll use the bridge image again. I'm going to copy this in to my bridge sample, hit paste, bring it up to the front. I'm going to convert it now to a smart object. So once you have something in there, you can convert it to a smart object. Now one of the cool things about it is I can scale this down really small. Hit return. Now most of the time when you do a normal image and you scale it down, it's that's what size it is now. You've lost all those pixels. There's nothing else left in there. It's 3 inches now or whatever that is. But with a smart object, it's actually remembering that, so you can actually bring it back to full size again, and it's not going to lose any quality. It's still a bitmap, but it's kind of saving that like in a separate folder, like it did basically here, and it's thinking of it as a separate object, and just going ahead and, it's kind of like it's doing almost like an avatar of that image in there. So it's not really scaling the image itself, it's just scaling the way it displays. Right, it won't affect file size, and you can go ahead then and scale these down, and then you can start adjusting their sizes, and like this, and these are all still independently scaled, and so I can make all these now go back to this original size if I want, or I can go ahead and click on all these now, like I did earlier, and edit them again, and invert that, and make it sky pink, save that, and it's going to update them all again, just like before. It's, in some ways, I guess it is kind of like, yeah. But it's really useful. I mean, I use them from time to time, especially if I'm going ahead and I'm putting one object to like a lot, like maybe I'm putting snowballs into a Christmas photo or something, or I'm adding bricks to something. I might go ahead and do that. I've actually built a brick wall, an artificial one before in Photoshop because that's the way they wanted it, and I used smart objects for that just because it made it easier. I could adjust them all real quick that way, and stuff like that.
I like to think of smart objects, excuse me, I like to think of smart objects as symbols in Flash. We use Flash, we don't recommend that much anymore. But, you create an instant, a symbol of something, and you change the parent, all of the children change, right? So that's the same as smart objects, same thing as in After Effects, you have that effect, and then also in Illustrator, you have isolated layers and drill down into a 3D, an image.
So, yeah, I mean, they're useful, but like I said, if I save this file now, it's going to be a decent sized file now. Let's see. My bridge design file, sample file, I mean, it's not too big, it's 189 megs, so I mean, it's not like massive by any means. But like my R2D2 picture, it's weird. Last time I opened this, it was much larger. Oh well. But they do tend to take up a lot of space, so. And they do slow your computer down. So. Do you have any other questions? Thought somebody's hand up over here.
Totally off the topic.
Sure. Since I ran short, you can ask me anything.
You have no idea.
Yeah, I'll do what I can.
Well, the brand new features in the Photoshop CC 2015 and also artboards.
I have not got a chance to use artboards. I'm always leery of using artboards because I've had so many other Adobe products crash when using them, especially in design, is really bad about doing that from time to time, and it's always at really inconvenient times.
Artboard is similar to Artboard in Illustrator.
Yeah.
They borrow that feature from Illustrator.
Huh.
I'm not an Illustrator person yet.
It allows you to create different canvas and Artboard, and you just write on each one of them.
See,
Can you create different sizes
Yeah.
of layers in, let's say, dimensions in one Photoshop file?
Yeah.
don't know on that one.
Is that the artboard?
Yeah, the Artboard.
See, to me, that did not seem useful in the least to me. If I'm going to create different files, I'm just going to go ahead and create different files.
Well, the reason why you do it in Illustrator is typically you might do some stationery. So you might have a 8x10 sheet of paper, you might have a little small
Business card.
and a little flyer or whatever.
Yeah.
So you have different sizes for different stationery objects. And so that same concept they use in Photoshop now.
Now I know in design you can go ahead and create different size pages for that, which is useful for something like that. But as somebody who works in the print industry, I really absolutely hated because I'd have to tear apart the PDFs then, and split their pages out because You can't send multiple size documents to the same
I think
grid
you
like
can
that.
you can send them out separate.
Yeah.
Separate files as well.
Creating a set of brushes.
That is something I can actually do. I've been playing around a lot recently with brushes. So I can show you how I made the snow over here, which is really cool. It's actually the same way I made the stars over here. Where is this piece right here? Right here. So the stars are actually made in the same way I made the this. So it's really cool. So what you'll do to go ahead and create snow or any kind of custom brush is I like to start out, really you need to know what size you want your custom brush to be. But I'm going to go ahead and start with 300 in this one. And I'm going to get my brush tool out, set it to black, and that's snow. All right, what do you guys think? Now, so what you'll do is you'll hit Command A, come up here to Edit, Define brush pattern, and I'm going to name this one New Snow. Let's go over here to, where's the bridge picture? There we go. And so now you can see I've got this thing here, but even with white, it's really not looking like snow. But if you come over here to these brush palettes, the first thing you're going to want to do is come up to brush tip shape, space these things out some. Then come over to dynamic brush, shape dynamic. How to pronounce these things? And what this is going to do is it's going to allow those brushes to actually change which those objects in the brush to change what size they are. And then I'll also play around a little bit with minimum diameter and angle jitter, which will allow them to actually move. And then I'll play with their roundness because snow isn't perfectly round. If you're doing stars, I suggest you actually keep this round for the most part. And then you can set minimum or maximum roundness if you want. Scatter, I turn on, kind of play with it a little. This really depends on how dense you want your snow. You want it blizzard or you want it flurries, you know? Here in Austin, a blizzard is where a lot of snow falls, and flurries are kind of like drizzle or like a little bit. So, I lived in Maryland for a year, and I'd always lived in the South before then, and I'd never really experienced what winter meant. I thought winter meant you got to put a hoodie on. So I got up there, and I had like no winter clothes. My winter clothes in Mississippi, where I used to live, were like Birkenstocks, and in Florida, it was like Birkenstocks and shorts. Whatever. Just put it on. You're not going to be outside that long. And I get up to Maryland, and it's like I'm starting to run. It's like November. I'm like, oh, it's a little chilly. That's nice. And by December, I'm like, is it over yet? Oh my God, am I prisoner? Is it over yet? Why is everything white? I can't handle this. And it was really bad. I learned what snow meant. We got 47 inches of snow that year. And then I looked for a new job, and I moved back down to the South because I was not going to live in Maryland. That was just too much. Snow is a lot like a relative. They're great for the first 3 days, and then afterward you're like, so don't you have work? Don't you have somewhere to be? I bet you Johnny hasn't seen you in a while, Anyway, back to the brushes. So let's see. I also like to use the dynamic color, and that's going to let some of these guys be more transparent. Oh, not some dynamic color, I'm sorry, but transfer. Yeah. And you can see now that some of these are transparent. So this is like a really good way of looking at what you're doing. So now we have our brush done. So now you see it looks really too big. So this will be like kind of like the snow that's really up close. So you're going to want to kind of scatter to this one more. But just go ahead and scale down that brush using your bracket keys, or you can come up here to your size. And then you can start putting this in. And if it looks still too dense, you can always go back and readjust the brush. And let's see. Let's scatter. Let's see. There we go. Let's try that out. There we go. And then if you want to make it even smaller, you can make it even smaller. Oops. For really light flurries and stuff like this. So that looks good at first. And so we got that first far away layer of snow done. We're going to pretend I got that everywhere because it's going to take forever. And then what you do is you come up here to filter, and then I like to use surface blur. This is going to be a little bit far away, and depending on the size of your, oh, I should have done this on a new layer. Okay. These bigger brushes do take up some horsepower. Alright, so then you can open the surface blur. And depending on the size of the snow and how far away it is from the camera, supposedly you'll change these up some. And then I like to go up to motion blur and give it a little bit of movement. Now, if you're really good with actions, you can build an action to do these two filters. And then for the bigger pieces of snow, you can just repeat the action or put adjustments in them so you don't have to keep doing them by hand. So I did way too much there. Let's go to a blur. Let's turn that down some. And my computer's angry. All right, and then a little bit of motion on that. And if you just keep repeating this, letting the brush get larger and larger, eventually you'll get snow like I have here, which looks pretty cool actually. It kind of gives it that real kind of, I don't want to be outside anymore look. I'm not going out to jog. It's too cold. I'm not a polar bear. So, but yeah, that's a lot of fun. I've been playing around a lot more recently with brush sizes and brushes and trying to learn dynamic ways of doing things. Also, if you're trying to create a really cheesy star background with lots of different types of stars, you can use the same effect as well, except for you don't tweak the size of it. So, kind of cool. I used to be able to place them by hand and keep moving them and stretching them, and you're like, I want to shoot myself, and now you can just be like, there you go, you're done. Now I'm just going to sit here on Facebook now for the next 45 minutes, so you don't think my job's really easy. So, but yeah, I love custom brushes. I've really gotten frustrated lately because I do a lot of mural work, and I have not been able to create the brushes I need or find them because like they keep topping out. It's like high-res brushes, 300 pixels, and I'm like, oh, that's not high-res. I need something much bigger than that because I'm doing a 25-foot mural. And the way I've gotten around that is, let's find some old paper. Usually I'll find paper a little bit more textured than this, and I will come in and I will select an area like that. Maybe turn down my opacity a little. And let's go on to two new layers. Black. And then white. I can select this now and set it as a massive brush. So I can just easily come up here, define brush pattern. And you can see this is a 3500 pixel brush. Big, nasty brush. And let's go over to new document. Where's new? Inches. And you can see there's our big, nasty brush. It's really, really big. It's a 10-inch brush at this point. But the thing is, if you start using this on, like, let's say we have a new document here, it's going to go for inches. We're going to go for, I don't know, maybe 60 inches by 60 inches at 300. If I start doing this, it looks like poo. So that's when you go back over to your brush things and you'd go ahead and you'd start, I cannot click today, spacing these guys out some maybe. And also adjusting its angle, jitter, and size a little, maybe. And where's the rotation? Scatter. There we go, angle jitter. And now when I start doing this, you can see that it starts moving like this. And it kind of, this brush isn't a good example, but you can get some really nice organic looking brushes this way. especially if you're turning down your opacity and you start using other colors. You can start overlaying kind of some cool stuff, and you get some cool transparent effects. Yes, I do actually. My current laptop right now, I have a 1 terabyte solid state drive installed in it. It's a 2012 i5, I believe. And I have two partitions, a 350 gig partition that is solely scratch disk for Photoshop, and then a 650 gig partition for stuff, like programs, OS, files that I should have probably deleted by now, things like that. I've only filled up that scratch disk once. And I've got, if you look up here, I've got these little jet engine numbers up here, and this tells me the stats of all my drives. And the one I have at work's a little bit more complex since it's a bigger monitor, and it actually tells me the percentages of all my drives. So I can actually watch it as I'm doing Photoshop. It's showing me free spaces like 99, 98, 97, 2, 1, 1.5, and you're like, it's getting ready to crash, it's getting ready to crash, please finish, please finish. Okay, good, it's done. So, but yeah. Good tutorial site that's not mine. It's kind of old, but I still think it's funny. It's kind of lewd. It's You Suck at Photoshop. I learned a lot from there. Don't watch it in front of kids. Flern is really good. I learned a lot from Flern on YouTube. It's P-H-L-E-A-R-N, I believe. Like Photoshop Learn. It's Flern. The guy is a little bit goofy. He talks way too fast. And I find that he a lot of times will skip steps he's done in other previous tutorials without mentioning, if you want to know how I did that, see my last tutorial. And you're like, wait a minute, whoa. How did you get that in there to begin with? It's kind of frustrating. But, you eventually get used to digging through his stuff. So, I don't know, I do 2 to 3 hours a week still of continuing education in Photoshop. Just because I've got a stable job and I think I know what I'm doing doesn't mean I do. I found that, teaching stuff like this, I've learned a lot about how blend modes actually work and why. I mean, honestly, to begin with, I just kind of poke around in the dark like, oh, that one didn't work. That one didn't work. That one didn't work. I liked that one. And now I'm kind of like, well, I do need this to drop out to black, so let's go ahead and do that same. Did that one work? Did that one work? But in this area. And you kind of, yeah, so it's kind of like, yeah, I know the outlets in this area of the wall, instead of just kind of like hitting the entire wall looking for it. But, you just continue to learn, continue to get better. Never think you know everything. Once you think you know everything, you're probably in the wrong industry because that means you're no longer enjoying it and you don't want to keep doing it. So that's really for anything. I don't care if it's Photoshop or being a doctor or building race cars. If you think you know everything and you don't want to continue to learn or you're not excited about what's coming out next year, then change what you're doing. So. I've never really used it. I thing is, I never really see too many people ever use it or ask questions about it, so I've never really been that concerned about it. So.
I know in the undo with the history,
Mm-hmm.
there's ways you can go back and like set points where you can say basically.
Yeah. So let's say first of all, you have to realize that your default Photoshop is 30 undos, which sounds like so much until you're like nudge, nudge, nope, nudge, nudge, nope. Or if you're doing like a photo restoration and there's a million little points on their face, you're getting rid of little scratches. And each time you use that heel brush tool, that's an action. And so all of a sudden that 30 is like gone in like 10 seconds and you're like, oops. So the first thing you want to do, I personally like, is I'll go up to my preferences and I will go up to my history log. Or not history log, where is it? File handler, I believe. They moved everything. I hate when they do this. I feel like they do this sometimes just to make you feel like, hey, we updated stuff. It's performance. There we go. And you have history states. I like to set mine to 50 or higher usually. You can now set it to 1,000 apparently, which 100 used to be the max. But remember, every time you up that history size, it's going to take more and more RAM and eventually more and more scratch disk. So don't just think to yourself, I could use 1,000. That'll be great. And then you don't sure why, and you've done a big project, your computer won't move. And then up here, you've got a couple of different things that I like to show off. I'm just going to show off my entire history ideas here, since you asked. All right, here. Damn it, I keep hitting the wrong freaking button. history options. I like to set up create snapshot automatically first. So that means when I open up a thing, it's going to create that snapshot. I think that one's default. But automatically create new snapshot when saving is really useful. So say you're saving like every 10 minutes and you're saving it, but you're not saving it to a new file name. This will allow, it'll do what's called a snapshot. So if I really like this and I hit this button here, it's going to create a snapshot there. And then if I do a little more, I can hit another snapshot. And a little more. But I can now go back to that previous snapshot even if it's exceeded how many history saves I have. So there we go. So even if it's over that 50 or, God forbid, that 1,001 limit, you know, you can still go back. And history options. The other one I like is non-linear saves. Because I don't know if you've ever done this, but you've stepped back to like look at your piece, and then you accidentally click your mouse and you put a brush on the original piece, and you're like, my history's gone. I haven't saved. I lost everything. Well, what a non-linear save does is it just adds that onto the end, so you can actually go back and forth in time in your history. It's really confusing at first. It takes a little bit to get used to, but it's totally worth it once you get used to it. And I really like it. So now, anytime I save this piece, it's going to create a new one. Every time I hit this button, it's going to create a new one. And I have 50 undos, essentially. Also, if you hit Option Command Z, you can actually do more than one undo at a time. So, you know, Photoshop, usually it's just all or nothing, or not all or nothing, but just the last two you've done, which can get really frustrating. If you hit Option Command Z on a Mac, you can do more than one. So. Not really, but you also have to realize the snapshots are ephemeral. If I save this object after I get the snapshot 4, and then reopen it, snapshot 1 through 3 are going to be gone. It's not going to be able to go back and save that stuff. So, if you really want to keep that, I would suggest saving it out as a version before you quit. I think it does. I've never used it. I think it's more for web designers than people like me. So, really sorry I ran short, guys. Seemed like I had enough. Yeah, and you know, you can always put questions up later if you're like, you know, I should have asked Kenneth. You can put it up on the Facebook page, what we call the Adobe User Group Facebook page, or you can contact me on Facebook, or put it up in Photoshop is Fun, or you know, send Donna a snail mail letter, and eventually the next meeting she'll give it to me, and then I'll look at it and be like, okay, well, eventually I'll get back to you because I don't have an address on here, nor do I want to buy a stamp. Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff up here. I mean, other than duplicate current layers and stuff like that, smart objects. You know, I rarely go into these things because I don't really need it other than delete all. You can export layers as we call like each layer as a save file if you want. Yeah, like, oops. So if I go up to something like this, I can come up to File, Export, Layers to Files. So if you've created like several different documents in there, you can save it out as like Photoshop or JPEG or TIFF files that way. Yeah. Pardon?
Yeah, I'm thinking of a page on a lesson I just did where there was this whole timeline that gets brought in pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And I made all the different layers.
Yeah.
And then saved each one out individually.
Oh, it takes forever. You can do it as an action, I guess, but it would be easier to do as like this. Although I have used this with actions before. We were doing a sign for LinkedIn, and the sign was built so that way it was like one object that said, "Be yourself." I don't remember, something cheesy like that, something self-inspirational. But they cut it into 2-inch sections and they hung it in the wall, sticking out at a 90-degree angle. So when you're walking down the hallway, it reads one thing one way and reads another thing the other way. but we had to design it in a certain way so that way I could go ahead and save those images backwards. And I ended up building a Photoshop action to basically like crop in this way. I can start up there and then save it out, and then it would crop out this way because I didn't crop the pixels, and then crop back in this way and save again. And I kept doing that like that until I actually was able to go ahead and do it. And it took me like 4 hours to figure out how, and then like 10 minutes to accomplish it afterward, which was frustrating. So, sure.
So you're going to, you have your history built up that you did, and you're looking in this whole panel of histories. It's like, that history, I want, that one little thing, I want to get rid of it. And you do, and it deletes everything beyond it.
Yeah, history's unfortunate. You just can't pull, like in real world, you can't just pull that one event out of history and let everything just kind of suck back in. It doesn't quite work that way. One thing I really wish they would do in their histories, though, is I wish I could group certain things I've already done and go, make this an action. That to me would be like, because a lot of times I'll be like, all right, how am I going to do this? And I'll figure it out. I'll be like, okay, that worked. And then you're going to be like, you're sitting down, you're like taking screenshots, and then you're like, okay, I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this. If I could just isolate those and like save like a group to like an action, that would be like, oh, that would save me so much time. I mean, the plugin I wrote for Photoshop now has 2,700 separate actions in it, containing about 100 different items in them. It's basically like a full-fledged Photoshop plugin at this point. And it's nice. It does a lot. I'm the only one in the goddamn company that can run it. But if we end up hiring you, you'll be running the action series for me. So you'll learn a lot about actions. So you got to be passionate about them. Well, unlike my last assistant. So
What are your favorite plugins?
I don't use any. I always do the stuff myself. I figure it out. I build my own actions for stuff, things like that. I don't know. To me, I like plugins, but I find that if I understand why something works better, I can use separate components of it to go ahead and do it myself. The only thing I do use plugins for usually is when somebody wants Chrome. Like, I really want it to look like a bumper, and then I will use like Alien Skin if my copy hasn't expired already. No, my copy's expired. But that shows you how often I use it. So, the only other exterior program I use in concert with Photoshop is Photomatics, I believe. Yeah. Photomatics 5. I like Photomatics. And this is if you're processing multiple images into an HDR image. I find that Photoshop does a piss poor version of a copy of that. And this just gives you a lot of options, a lot of tweaking. You can make some really good and really bad photos with it. I don't know if I have any files to do that with at the moment. No, what is that disk format? NEF. Let's try NEFs. I might. No, these are not. These are just standard ones. Those aren't a bracketed set I did. No, I don't have any bracketed NEF files on here right now at the moment, but maybe that's one. Nope, not a bracketed NEF. Oh, here we go. So this is something I shot a few years ago, actually, at a car show. Load brackets. And it's going to give you some information about this, like, hey, I noticed this isn't really a bracketed photo, you're trying to fool me. And I'm like, shh. Yeah, and it may not do a full bracket in the sense it realized these were fake brackets for photos. So that's, you have to go, it'll go ahead. So when you're doing an HDR photo, you're taking photos at different f-stops, not aperture, yeah, exposures, thank you. And then you're combining them in because none of these photos are going to get all the lights and the darks. Sometimes you'll get a photo that's got a great sky, but the building is blown out or too dark. But if you get a great building, the sky is completely blown out. So if you go ahead and take different exposures, you can go ahead and combine them into one and then basically take the best parts of each. And you can see it's got some presets here. And you know, you can make stuff look really, really nice. But you know, just keep it as, I like to keep it a little more natural. You know, you can do fun stuff with it. Sometimes you have clients that really want that sports car look where the car looks like it's moving in the photo when it's standing still. And you know, you can adjust all sorts of stuff in this. And then when you're done, you hit apply, you get photos like this. Here's the front end of that car right there. The HDR photo I did for that. So, kind of gives it a hyper-realistic look. So, and I suggest you end up doing your photoshopping, like getting out like dents or like pieces of dirt on the cars after you do the HDR, because Photoshop, even though it looks good in each individual photo, it's not filling those pixels in the same, and it'll make a weird blurry spot on the car. Like that one spot of the car was moving, but nothing else was. So. Sorry, I only had an hour and 15 minutes worth of stuff. I'll do better next time. So, yeah. Oh, wow, it's bright. Cool beans. I'm going to stick around if anybody had any questions for me afterward.
So I guess, Cornelius, you want to go for February?
Yeah, I think I can do next month. Bootstrap.
No.
What is
Three
Bootstrap?
sets of fins, by the way.
Bootstrap is a
Every time I see it on
is a
the
framework
first thing
that
I look
allows
for
you to
is
responsive
if it's
mobile
anatomically
first.
correct.
Oh,
So,
I took a picture of that one and I kind of drew it from that.
For the web,
yeah,
for
they get that last set pretty close sometimes.
So completely getting away from Photoshop.
well, it's using Dreamweaver though.
Oh, okay.
So it's using Dreamweaver.
You can
That's
kind of
integrated
see it
into
with the long
Dreamweaver.
film
I
ones.
think
It's
kind of
easier to
up
see
in the
that
Yeah.
third set
to go with, you know,
because they keep it
foundation,
closer
Bootstrap,
to their body than the
several
other films.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Bootstrap
I'm
seems to
quite
really
fond.
go.
No, you're
I'm
fine.
in the Pond Society.
Got it.
It's fun.
I'm going to the Zilker Park tomorrow too because they have some baby koi. They're going to give away to members of the society.
Oh, cool.
So,
I did have
you
one.
need a koi.
Yes. Well, I would need first I need a permanent house.
Longer, but
There's that.
I'm only renting, so.
people just,
My first pond was a half barrel.
I'm doing all
Really?
my training right now in Bootstrap.
Too small for a koi, but
Show you an example.
Yeah, I said be afraid to with my 6-year-old. One thing I did want to ask questions of some people before everybody heads out. I've been thinking about this with some of my friends that we might be able to get more people here that unfortunately have to work day jobs or maybe are trying to transition into the digital world. If we could find a place to maybe meet up on maybe Thursdays or Tuesday nights, maybe after 7 o'clock, people get off. Maybe some place that serves food, that it's got a screen and a quiet room. If I could find a place, would we be interested maybe not next month, maybe the month after, trying to see if we could do the meeting at an alternate location, to see if we could get a different pool of people?
you mean an additional meeting or a substitute?
I don't know.
That you would need maybe a separate meetup.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it could be a second.
yeah, that would be fine too.
I'd like the setup here. I hate to, lose this. And I understand that at the same time, there's a lot of people who just can't make it.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
I've got like 5 or 6 people I know at my office that are like, I'd love to go, but I'm hourly and I can't just move time shift where I'm working.
Yeah. Or, and it.
What if we did it on an experimental basis?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not
Well,
saying we permanently do.
Even, now, the other thing about just doing and possibly the same presentation, but in the evening.
Yeah.
So if somebody's willing
Might
to
be a
do
good
it
option
twice,
too, yeah.
we can find that way.
Even on a quarterly basis, if monthly's too much.
Yeah.
That might be a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it'd be good to get some new members in, especially if people are like, I might take off work if I knew what I was getting, but I don't know it's a known quantity, and I don't want to go ahead and just be out the time.
Yeah, sure, it's a possibility, and I guess location.
I mean, I could start scouting locations.
Sure, well, I was thinking if it's gonna be someplace that's not, I live way north, so, for example, not way south on Swan, for example, so, even though some people say, but that'd be perfect.
Yeah.
Try something that's
Midway.
Well, we want to also get someplace that's not also like central Austin, where it's going to be like super busy no matter what time of the night it is.
Yeah.
So we'll have to find someplace kind of out of the way. You know, just a thought.
Will New Horizon allow us to do at night?
I haven't asked, but I don't think so. I can ask, but I'd be surprised.
Yeah, I was kind of curious.
Expect them to just close up,
Yeah, I didn't know what time they closed.
I think they close up. Yeah, exactly.
Because what was the name of the meetup group that some of these lovely people came from today?
The AD, Austin,
Yeah. What's
Austin Digital Visual.
Yeah, I mean, I went to one of his meetups he had at some pizza place, and we had like 50, 60 people in this little room because like nobody showed up until like 15 minutes after it started. And it wasn't really like a presentation. Everybody came up and did their own like, hey, I'm from this group kind of thing. But they had a lot of people. I met a lot of people that I wouldn't have normally met, and I think it's a good opportunity for people to meet other people, especially if other people are looking for jobs. And
Oh, absolutely.
you know, we're kind of in an isolated area here, and that could be bringing in new blood might find more people more work.
Yeah, no, sure. I'm open to it.
Cool.
I don't want to say adios, New
I think
Horizon.
it'd
No,
be
no.
more of a thing where it's more, it could be like a social
Yeah.
gathering, networking together.
You know, we might not even have to have a presentation, just like a meet and greet kind of like.
Exactly, or it could be more of a how-to, just like for Q&A things.
Yeah.
That, or you could, if it's quarterly, you could show highlights from the 3 previous presentations. And say, this is what, we had going on, and this is where you can find them online.
Oh.
And incorporate that into the social.
Or we could do like a quick tips. We get like 3 presenters. Hey, do one thing you're really good at. Do like a 15-minute presentation. Do 15 minutes of questions. We get like a 15-minute interview, people talk and stuff. Another 15-minute presentation, 15-minute questions, kind of thing. So that way you can cover a couple of different pieces of Adobe software, and still kind of have like a social aspect to it. So.
Sure. You want to also post something on the Facebook group about it.
Yeah.
And if y'all are not on the Facebook group, go ahead, please join.
Yeah.
That seems like brainstorm and share ideas, things like this. Absolutely.
So.